Welcome to the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Schmedeke, and today we are brought to you by Applewood Plumbing, Heating, and Electric. They have been serving Denver residents for 50 years. They are the proud sponsor of the Colorado Avalanche, and they are the proud sponsor of this podcast. And on this edition, I'm talking with Tyler King about college football weekend, and I'm going to dabble in some hoops too. So, Tyler, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. It's been pretty crazy. We're it's crazy to think we're winding down the college football season a little bit, and then college hoops starts Monday, so it's a pretty busy time for you and everybody. So I'm going to start with the Buffs because they're what people want to hear. Last week they lose 28-16 at UCLA, a game that I can't decide if it was that close or not that close. It's very hard to decide, but a game where Shedeur Sanders just got beat down. The offensive line did not play well. You were out there in LA. What'd you see last Saturday?
I think I'm going to lean towards a game that was never really as close as it seemed, just because of
Yeah.
CU's inability to score the ball and just like my general feeling every time they had the ball. I wasn't like expecting much of anything. Like you said, Shedeur was sacked 7 times. He remains the most sacked quarterback in the country at this point, and I think he's on pace to be the most sacked quarterback like in a single season in like college football history. I saw that stat, earlier today. I mean, they still can't run the ball at all. I mean, they're not really even trying to. I mean, Shedeur had 13 carries for 20 yards. Some of that is sacks, and that was like 13 of the 24 rushes that the Buffs technically had. I mean, he threw the ball 43 times for only 217 yards, 1 touchdown late in the game, after the game was kind of already decided. I mean, the streak continues. They've had a touchdown in every game this season, but yeah, I mean, it was 7-6 at halftime, and they had 3 points off 4 turnovers forced by the defense. So I think that kind of told you everything you needed to know about what was going on last Saturday. I mean, Travis Hunter has 2 pretty impressive interceptions, and Shiloh Sanders has a fumble and then gets ejected for targeting. I mean, it was kind of like an up and down night where there were some positives, but I mean, they're just not really on the level of a team like UCLA, who's in its 6th season again under Chip Kelly, and it just kind of showed. I mean, that's just how it is for first year coaches. You're not usually as good as you would like to be at certain spots.
So, I felt early on they could have been up like 14-0.
Yeah.
I mean, with those turnover, that good first drive, and then they get the turnover, and instead it was 6-0, and that just wasn't going to be enough. But we can talk about the Pac-12 schedule in a little bit, but that UCLA defense is mean and nasty.
Yeah, they're really good. And I mean, it was just kind of not surprising, but just like kind of jarring to see like every third down, UCLA has got like 5 or 6 guys lined up at the line of scrimmage. None of them have their hand
Yeah.
in the dirt. They're all like standing ready to just run by the Colorado offensive line. And it felt like every third down, Shedeur had no chance. He had no chance. He had like a half second to get rid of the ball. And UCLA's got a couple pretty good corners. And that was all. They were just getting, I mean, the quarterback hits that they had, it felt like it was like every third down play they were getting to Shedeur. And Coach Prime said after the game that Shedeur needed to get an injection of some pain meds at halftime to kind of get through that game. So just kind of shows how physical that UCLA defense is and kind of the challenges they bring. But I mean, we'll get into this week's game against Oregon State, but a similar matchup in terms of the style of play you're going to be facing on both sides of the ball, and just the general physicality that will likely be overpowering for the Buffs.
Well, I remember, I think when it was like, I don't know, the Buffs were only down 1 score, and they hit that long pass to Weaver finally, and
Yeah,
they were in the red zone. And then I swear he got like sacked, pressure, and
it was like 3 plays in a row. Yeah,
yeah. And I was like, and then Coach Prime says after the game, well, we're just going to have to get some new linemen, which I'm sure was an instant reaction, but he probably means it.
yeah, he definitely does. Like, I mean, you can listen to what he says after games, and that is kind of really how he feels. A lot of times in his Tuesday pressers with us, he's a little bit more muted, just generally has a different tone after kind of having a couple days to let things sit and calm down a little bit. But that kind of immediate reaction with us after the game was kind of, I genuinely feel that's how he feels. They picked up a JUCO offensive tackle earlier this week, and they've got a 5-star offensive lineman, 2024 kid that's going to be in town this week. So they're definitely going to be pushing hard. Offensive linemen typically aren't the ones that are in the transfer portal typically aren't the best because usually they're leaving a situation where they weren't getting a lot of playing time. But if there are any, guys with a lot of starts under their belt, that kind of seems to be the general barometer for offensive line success in college football is starts. It's just getting a bunch of guys that have started a lot of games. You look at Florida State, that's kind of what they've done with their team. They brought in Casey Roddick, who had plenty of starts for the Buffs over the last couple of years, and he's been a really solid guy for them. So they're going to do their best this offseason to kind of get whatever offensive lineman they can, because other than Van Wells, the center, I don't really know if there's going to be anybody on that starting 5 this week that'll be back, or at least starting next season. There's going to be a lot of new faces in that room and maybe a new coach. Who knows? We'll see what comes with that.
Well, we had talked after that game kind of through email with sports editor Paul Klee about the guys who left. What they're not starting anywhere either, except for Casey Roddick.
Yeah, it's just Casey Roddick. I mean, Jake Wiley, who's a Centennial native, that started at right tackle last season for the Buffs. He's a backup at right guard for UCLA right now. But I mean, the rest of the guys really aren't playing anywhere. I mean, 2 of the starters from last year's team are still on the team in Wells and Jared Christian Lichtenhand, who seems like he got benched last week.
It seems like he's not playing. Yeah.
Yeah, but he came in a little bit for some injury. It was like there was so much rotating and shuffling in and out, but like all the veteran guys they brought in from the offseason really haven't worked out, like Jack Wiltie, Jack Bailey from Kent State, Landon Beebe. Those guys really all haven't played that well. Savion Washington, the right tackle, has been okay. They got him back from injury last week, but there were times where UCLA's star defensive end, Laiatu Latu, would just kind of run right by him. I mean, that's a tough matchup for any tackle in the country. Yeah. Latu's that good, but even Savion Washington was struggling last week. So I have imagined there's going to be a lot of new faces next season on the offensive line because they're going to try. They want to make a real run next year in the expanded playoff, in a Big 12 that they should have a shot to be competitive in. They want to make a real run, and they need to get better on the offensive line right away if they want to do that.
So let's fast forward to Oregon State, who's a nice late start, Coach Prime's favorite and our favorite as well, 8 p.m., which means 8 what, 40?
8:20
kickoff. Is there a game before it? Is there like a MAC game?
There's probably an ESPN game beforehand. So it'll probably be 8:20 and the game will be over right around midnight again.
Yeah. Super. Yeah. But Oregon State, like you talked about, another real physical team, probably going to beat the Buffs up a little bit.
Yeah.
And they kept talking about this on the broadcast. Herb Street kept bringing this up, that they didn't keep anybody in to help. Like, that's just not their style. They like to spread them out. But when it was 4-on-5, UCLA was getting the Shedeur stand. When it was 3-on-5, I feel like Oregon State's going to be like, oh, we can get to this guy without a problem.
Yeah, and anytime they brought more than 4, if they brought 5 or 6, it sure just had no time. And there were going back and watching the tape. I mean, there were plenty of plays where Michael Harrison was in there, but I'll give Michael Harrison a lot of credit for what he's done as a walk-on this year.
Yeah.
But he's not a pass protector. He's just not. I mean, he just had no shot. It was kind of weird kind of watching warm-ups. There was only 2 tight ends that traveled to the game. I'm not sure what was up there. It was just Harrison and Brady Kopetz. Caleb Fourier and Eli Yelverton, the other 2 tight ends that have played this year, both didn't travel. So not sure what was up there, but Harrison, even when they did try to keep him in there as an extra blocker, didn't do much. And those plays really stuck out to me. So yeah, this Oregon State defense is very physical. I don't think they pose the same pass rushing threat that UCLA does with kind of their speed guys, but it's going to be another tough week trying to run the football, even if CU does want to. So but I think the physicality is going to show up more on the other side of the ball, where I think Oregon State's going to be really, really going to be able to control this game with their rushing attack, and because they've got a couple guys that are really dynamic on that offense.
Well, I was going to just say my next thing was that, I mean, Damian Martinez averages almost 6.5 yards a carry.
Yeah.
And it's probably, is he the best running back in the Pac 12? He's got to be up there.
Yeah, it's probably him or Jay Knott from Cal. I think is the leading rusher in the Pac-12,
Yeah.
but I would take Martinez. I think they're both sophomores, both really, really good players. So CU doesn't have to play Cal this year, but they've got to go against Martinez, who's going to be a very, very tough matchup. I think he ran for, I forget what the exact total was, but he ran for a lot of yards against them last year in Corvallis.
Yeah. Yeah. As a freshman. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then they have the former Clemson quarterback. I'm not going to try to say his name, but
DJ Uiagalelei.
yeah, the quarterback. I mean, they're just a good, solid team.
Yeah.
They're coached well. You know, they're right in that they're not Washington, Oregon, but they're right below them probably. So, I mean, the Buffs are 14-point dogs at home. I just think that there's probably just a little bit too much there on that Oregon State team for them, for the Buffs.
Yeah, it's another team kind of like last week where Chip Kelly's in his 6th year at UCLA. Jonathan Smith, you know, a legend for the Beavers as a player, is in his 6th year as the head coach there. He's done a really good job establishing the culture and getting the guys they want in there. Like we talked about, they're really big up front on both sides of the ball. And yeah, getting Uiagalelei to play quarterback this year has been a big boost. He's, you know, still kind of that same inconsistent passer that we saw at Clemson, but this is a run first team anyway, and his ability as a dual threat guy just kind of adds to that offense that I think is just going to give CU plenty of troubles this week.
So in the Pac-12, the Washington USC game has kind of lost its luster with USC losing twice, but that's probably the best game of the weekend in the Pac-12. UCLA Arizona just fascinates me. They're fun to watch. I don't think that's a guaranteed win for the Buffs like people thought anymore. We've kind of talked about that, but I mean, you know, Washington. I mean, Oregon's got Cal at home, so they're 25-point favorites. So I think they're going to be okay. So I mean, but we did watch Washington stumble against the Stanford team that came back on CU.
Yeah, Washington stumbled against Arizona State at home the week before as well. So Washington, kind of since the Oregon game, hasn't been operating at its same capacity. But I mean, against this USC defense, is this the best matchup they've had recently? I mean, this USC defense is really bad. I mean, this could be the perfect game for Penix and that high flying Husky offense to get back on track this week. But yeah, the other game definitely is the UCLA game against Arizona in Tucson. Things that just like really turned around for the Wildcats since they put the freshman quarterback in, Noah Fifita, I think is how you say his name. He replaced Jaden DeLaura earlier this year, and he just kind of hasn't looked back. They gave USC all they could handle at the Coliseum a couple weeks ago, and then now have beaten Washington State handedly, and then beat Oregon State this past weekend. Granted, it was in Tucson, but that kind of ended Oregon State's hopes of either reaching the Pac-12 title game or maybe even being a long shot playoff contender. But I think they might be able to play spoiler this week against UCLA as well. And I think they're going to come into the Folsom the following week, and they could be double-digit favorites against this Buffs team if they continue to play like they have on offense.
So let's flip over to Mountain West. Last week Air Force and CSU played. Air Force, that game was close for a while, but Air Force pulled away 30-13. So Air Force still ranked, but this week is the border war for the Rams and Cowboys of Wyoming. But first of all, what did you see last week in that Snow Bowl game?
Yeah, it was going on at the same time as the UCLA game. So I was, I'm sitting there in Pasadena, very, very much not envying everyone who was at that game in Fort Collins. Very different weather-wise, but I was kind of impressed early on with CSU. They, had that big touchdown pass from Fowler Nicolosi to Justice Ross Simmons to tie it up at 7. And they early in the game, especially in the first half, they did a really good job of getting Air Force off the field, getting them in those like 3rd and long situations where Air Force kind of has to throw the ball. And obviously that's not what they want to do. But it was just the second half. They kind of got worn down. With the way that Jay Norvell likes to recruit, they have 20 new guys every year, and most of them haven't played in the snow before. So that's always a challenge, but an unsurprising result, I would say. I kind of maybe would have expected CSU to do a little bit more offensively, but this Air Force team is really good. And, even though it's only the first rankings of the college football playoff this week, they're at 25. I think they should be higher. I think they're a little bit underrated nationally, and I think they should be able to pick up a pretty convincing win over Army at Mile High this week, which will be a really fun environment. Another game that I'll be at this weekend. So, yeah, a lot to look forward to this weekend in the Mountain West.
Yeah, real quick. Tyler will be at every game this weekend. He will be at Border War tomorrow night. He will be at Air Force Army during the day, and then in Boulder at 8. So his coverage will be everywhere on this college football weekend. I was going to talk about the CFP in a little bit, but let's talk about it now a little bit about how Tulane is ranked ahead of Air Force right now.
Yeah.
I mean, Air Force is going to have to win out to get that New Year's Six game, probably.
Yeah, it seems that way right now. I mean, I was kind of surprised. I mean, Tulane is a good team, but I don't know. I just maybe just because I get to watch Air Force. I try to watch Air Force every week, and they are undefeated. Tulane's 7-1, but their one loss is a good Ole Miss team. They play at East Carolina this week. They should win that game. I don't know if they're going to slip up this year, and maybe that's just if they are a one-loss champion in the American Conference. Maybe that's enough to get them that final or that spot for the group of 5 teams in the New Year's Six, like they did last year. They played USC in the Cotton Bowl, but I would have really liked to see Air Force been ahead of them at this point. Maybe if Air Force, I think it's a strength of schedule thing at this point. I think the committee was sending a pretty clear message with their valuing quality wins as well as kind of the eye test. And right now, what the most impressive win is probably Wyoming for Air Force. If they're able to maybe roll against Army, Hawaii, UNLV, and then Boise at the end of the year, maybe that'll get them ahead of Tulane. But we'll have to see what the committee. Sometimes the committee changes its mind week to week, so it could all change next week.
Air Force doesn't play Fresno though, right?
No, but they end the year with UNLV at home and then at Boise. So Boise had a pretty impressive win over Wyoming last week. So that win could look pretty good if they're able to handle business in Boise.
Let's talk a little border war. What do you expect from that big rivalry game? Is every year. What's the weather going to be like in Laramie? Have you looked?
I think it's like in the 40s, so not terrible, but it's going to be pretty chilly, but not too bad. It's a 6 p.m. start, so not too late, which I always appreciate with these ridiculous 8 p.m. starts that I've had all year with the Buffs. But it should be a good game. I think Wyoming is the favorite and should be the favorite with how they've performed for most of the season, but like I said, they struggled last week, losing pretty big at Boise, 32-7. They just really couldn't stop Boise State, and they couldn't get going on offense. So maybe CSU's got a chance to control things offensively. But Wyoming does have a pretty solid defense. They get creative with their third down stuff, but I've been impressed with the Rams offensive line all season. I think they allowed the most sacks in the country last season, and they've made a tremendous improvement in that regard this season. They've had all 5 guys stay healthy, play every snap, and that's really benefited them. That's something I'll be writing about for my preview story for the game in tomorrow's Denver Gazette. But it's always an emotional game. It's always pretty close. Even last year, with how bad CSU was, it was 14-13 Wyoming. So it should be a close game, and maybe CSU is able to get over the hump this week and move within 2 wins of bowl eligibility, because they will have a chance in these last 4 games to get there.
We'll do predictions in a little bit, but let's talk national. Some pretty good games on the schedule this week. Georgia, Missouri, Bedlam, Oklahoma State for the last time, right? For a while?
For the last time. I don't think there's any on the schedule going forward.
Yeah, and then what was the other one I saw? Oh, LSU,
Texas, Kansas State.
And what's the other one?
Texas and Kansas State.
Texas and Kansas State. So it's a pretty good schedule this week.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the Alabama LSU is always such a big game. Obviously, we saw LSU win at home last season against Alabama. That was a big win for them. But yeah, I think Bedlam should be the game everyone nationally is paying attention to. It's that 3:30 ABC Eastern slot. Oklahoma's a 6-point favorite on the road, but they're coming off a loss, against Kansas last week. That was an impressive win for the Jayhawks. Oklahoma, barely beat UCF the week before, and they finally stumbled for the first time this season. So Oklahoma State's also, cracked the rankings in the first playoff rankings at 22. So it should be a pretty good game there for sure. And, I expect Georgia to handle business against Missouri, even though they've been one of the maybe more surprising and fun teams in college football this year. Obviously, they almost beat Georgia last year in Columbia, but this game in Athens this year could be the first week we really start to see Georgia prove itself against a team, a really good team, because they have had a pretty weak schedule so far. They had the one scare against Auburn, but have handled business so far, and maybe this week's game is enough to have them jump Ohio State, because I think there were a lot of people that were a little bit surprised to see Ohio State at 1 in the initial rankings, but I mean, I kind of wasn't with the Notre Dame and Penn State wins, but should be a big week for Georgia.
I was going to ask you. I have to feel that Ohio State's won because of those wins, and Georgia really hasn't played anybody yet.
Yeah, same with Michigan. Obviously,
Yeah.
Michigan is the team that a lot of people nationally think is the best team, but they just really haven't played anybody at this point, and it's hard to judge them at this point. They have their big games coming up against Penn State and Ohio State later in the year. They play Purdue this week. They're 32.5-point favorites. I mean, they've just rolled everybody, and maybe they know the signs, maybe they don't. Who knows what's going to come with that in the coming weeks? But what has their even toughest game been? Like they have their wins, like they played East Carolina, UNLV, who looks pretty good, who's had a pretty good year, and Bowling Green as their 3 non-conference games, all at home. Like those are all kind of joke games. And then, they played Rutgers, Nebraska, Minnesota, Indiana, and Michigan State, like 5 of the worst teams in the Big Ten so far. And they have Purdue this week. But next week they have at Penn State. So that's the really big week for Michigan, because I think there are a lot of people that do think they are the number 1 team in the country, but it's hard to kind of say that at this point with who they've played and who other teams have played and beaten, like Ohio State.
And they ranked them 1 with all this stuff going on. How are people feeling about that?
Well, I don't know. I think Michigan at 3, Ohio State at 1 right now is pretty fair at this point.
Yeah.
Like I said, with the dominant win over Penn State for Ohio State and the comeback win at Notre Dame, are just probably the 2 best collective wins anyone's had in the country this year. Florida State's win over LSU is impressive from week 1. Texas on the road against Alabama, but the collective of those 2 wins for Ohio State is probably enough in the first week. And it always changes by the end of the season anyway. I mean, I was listening to a podcast yesterday where somebody else was saying, like, remember the very first ever college football playoff rankings, who was number 1? Mississippi State. Like, that's how much
I remember that. Wasn't that when Dak Prescott was there?
I think so. Yeah. It was like 2014. They were undefeated and the number 1 team, but they obviously didn't make the playoff and had like 2 or 3 losses in the last couple weeks of the season. So a lot's going to change, but I think a lot of this will get sorted out itself with kind of the teams that still have to play each other, like the Ohio States, Michigans, Penn States. We could see a rematch between Washington and Oregon in a Pac-12 title game. We'll see if Florida State can go undefeated. We could get a Texas-Oklahoma rematch in the Big 12, and obviously Georgia could roll to another SEC title. So a lot of this stuff will get worked out as the season goes along.
I mean, what's Florida State's hardest game? They probably really don't have.
Louisville. I think they play Louisville next week. So that I think not Notre Dame. Excuse me. North Carolina was going to be the tough game for them, but they've really struggled. They've really kind of struggled, and that was going to be that ACC title game matchup people were looking forward to. But now it looks like it could be Louisville at that point of the year. I don't think they'll have trouble at Pitt this week. I don't think they'll struggle against Miami or at Florida in that big rivalry at the end of the year. So if Florida State is able to go undefeated and win the ACC, that'll definitely be enough to get them in.
They also have Northern Arizona in there, but whatever.
Yeah, what weird games.
Yeah. All right, let's go predictions. What do you got for CU Oregon State?
I'm going to go Oregon State in kind of a lower scoring game, but I'm going to go 24-13 Oregon State. I think CU is able to kind of keep it close a little bit, in kind of that fake close game that we saw like last week, where they just kind of struggled to finish drives off, or maybe they're not able to quite get in field goal range and they have to punt or whatever. I think Oregon State will be very content to kind of just run the clock out all game long and just kind of control with these long drives that we're typical of seeing from teams like Air Force. But I think Oregon State will be interested in doing something like that just to kind of get a win that they should over a team they should beat in CU.
Yeah, I was going to go 28-17 Oregon State. Like you said, I think it's won't be very exciting. I think it'll just kind of
Yeah.
be. Does Shiloh miss the first half, or does he get to come back?
No, he clarified that earlier this week because it was at the end of the first half, so he had to sit out the entire second half. He's
Okay.
good to go. For some reason, I thought that still didn't matter, but apparently he's good to go for the start of the game.
They do miss him when he's off. I mean, they've missed
Yeah.
him early in the season when he was hurt too.
Yeah, it's the communication aspect, I think, the most. That just kind of you saw on that very first drive of the second half. UCLA needed 2 plays
Yeah.
to score a touchdown out of halftime after CU had done a great job defensively all in the first half. And then, as soon as Shiloh comes out of it, has to come out of the game, and they're playing without him, they give up 2 massive big chunk plays and the touchdown right away. So it was definitely on full display. Shiloh was playing really well that game.
I never realized this, I guess, but he still got to hang out on the sideline. I didn't know that was allowed.
Yeah. You don't really have to. I don't think you have to go in the locker room anymore and sit there and twiddle your thumbs.
Okay.
Although maybe that would have been helpful in preventing some theft in the locker room. If he had
I didn't want to get too much into that, but that's another sad.
That's all I'll say on that.
Yeah,
it's disappointing. That's all I'll say about that. But maybe that would have been a preventative measure if he did have to go sit in the locker room.
I was just sitting in there. Okay, what about the border war? What do you got?
I would love to pick the Rams. I really think this could be that kind of breakout game for them, and just kind of the win they really need. Obviously, the Boise State, I'm hesitant to call it that kind of breakout game just because of how weird things like that. Scoring 3 touchdowns in 4 minutes just doesn't happen. And obviously, with the Hail Mary, it wasn't like a real they beat them. They just it was a fluky thing. Not like a fluke, but it was just like an end of the game snowball effect kind of
Everything
thing.
had to go right for them to win.
Yeah. And after they were outplayed for 3.5 quarters, essentially. But I'm just going to go with Wyoming, and I think it's going to be a close game. I'm going to go 17-16 Wyoming. I think it's going to be another 1-point game, maybe a heartbreaker for CSU. Maybe it's a game-winning field goal for the Cowboys, but that's just what I'm going to go with at this point. But until I see CSU beat Wyoming, I'm going to continue to pick the Cowboys.
Yeah, I was going to go Wyoming too. They're up there at home. I was going to go 19-14. Just something slugfest.
An ugly score.
Yeah, I don't see. Yeah, I don't see much. And then I think we both will probably have Air Force over Army over in Denver this week.
Yeah. Army's coming off a big loss at LSU last week. And I think Air Force will be able to. It won't be as close as the Navy game was a couple of weeks ago. I think Air Force will be able to control that one and put that one away pretty early.
And those are the games I think that hurt Air Force in those CFP rankings. I mean, they have to play Army and Navy, and I mean, Navy had good teams, and so has Army. But Air Force is kind of the class there on the football field,
for sure.
All right, so let's flip gears, talk a little hoops. You were previewing the college basketball season. In tomorrow's Denver Gazette, you have stories on the CSU men and women, on the CU men and women. I want to ask you about CSU a little bit because we usually talk about the Buffs more because they have a lot of expectations. But what kind of expectations do they have up in Fort Collins on the men's and the women's side?
I think the men's side pretty high. I was up at practice yesterday, just kind of observing and talking to some guys. They're a really, really athletic team, and I asked Nico Medved about that. Like, is this the most athletic team you've ever had in Fort Collins? And he said, I think so. Yeah. Obviously they added Nick Clifford from CU, Javante Johnson, his best friend from the Springs, a New Mexico transfer. They got Joel Scott, another Pikes Peak area guy who was the Division II Player of the Year at Black Hill State last year. They've really, really added a lot of talented guys on the wing. And obviously they've got Isaiah Stevens coming back as the preseason Mountain West Player of the Year and one of the top point guards and players in all of college basketball. So, I think the Mountain West is going to be good again this year. Obviously, we saw last year with San Diego State getting to the title game against UConn, but there's a good chance, I think, that the Mountain West gets a couple teams, 4 or 5 teams in the tournament again. And I think CSU really could be one of them. I think they have that athleticism and the length on the wing. I think they'll be really good defensively. And I think they've got plenty of pieces to play at a fast pace offensively. And even when things do slow down, they've got Isaiah Stevens, and their big man, Patrick Cartier, is a really skilled player in the post. So I'm pretty high on this CSU team. I think it's going to be a fascinating year. They've got an interesting non-conference schedule. And then once it gets to Mountain West play, it's just about kind of finding that consistency that they did 2 years ago with the David Roddy led team that was able to get them to a 6 seed in the tournament.
Do they open Monday as like everybody else?
Yep. They open Monday.
Who are they opening with?
I forget honestly. They have a couple.
It's kind of
They're
not a cupcake game, but yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those. They have Nico was telling me yesterday that the early schedule they have some games against teams that are have some really good players like in their conference. But
Louisiana Tech.
yeah, so they do have they host CU I think at the end of the month. They play Boston College in Kansas City and what should be a fun uh, tournament there, and they could play Creighton the second day, which would be a fascinating matchup against a really good Creighton team. They got Washington as well, so in the non-conference, so it should be a fun season for the CSU team. With it's a very older, veteran team, and those are the teams that have been really successful in March the last couple of years.
So over in Boulder, there's expectations on both those teams, men and the women. The women are the only team ranked in the state. They open the season against the defending champion LSU in Las Vegas, nationally televised. Really, really exciting for J.R. Payne's squad. And then the men's team, Tab Boyle's got his. He's still pulling recruits for next year too. I've seen some of those guys too.
They have a really good class coming in next year.
Yeah. So I mean, this is it's not make or break for Tad, but I mean, this is a year where they've got to perform.
Yeah, the thing I've been kind of telling people the last couple months when they've been asking me about this season for CU hoops, if they don't make the tournament this year, it'll be the first time I think in Tad's 14 years that there will be some real angst from the fan base. I don't think there's ever going to be like any actual pressure from administration just because it's Tad and it's his dream job and he's done so well relative to expectations that I think he's got this job for as long as he wants it. But from the fan base perspective, I think there's going to be some real angst and concern if not now, when for making the tournament, because they have everything they need. Tristan Da Silva is one of the best returning players in the country. They've got two really good guards in KJ Simpson and Julian Ammon III. They have a 5-star freshman in Cody Williams. They've got a pretty solid big man in Eddie Lampkin, and they've got some other older wings like Luke O'Brien and Javon Hadley that will contribute right away, or not contribute right away, but just be big time, play big time minutes for them. They have to make the tournament this year. I feel like they're picked to finish 4th in the Pac-12, and it's a better Pac-12 than it has been in recent years. USC is going to be really good. Obviously, Arizona, UCLA are good again, but they should be a competitive team that should be in that like 20 to 35 range in terms of national standing. They've got some tough games in the non-conference, like a Florida State early in the year or UNLV, one of those two teams. They'll play at CSU. They'll play Miami, who made the Elite Eight last year in Brooklyn. Before getting to a tough Pac-12 schedule. So yeah, on both the men and women's side, the expectation is the NCAA tournament. And I think if you ask the coaches candidly, I think the expectation is to advance past the first weekend of the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and I think that's Tad's next step. Like, they have never gotten out of that first weekend. They did. They won that first game, and then I always think back to that year they made the unbelievable run in the Pac-12, and then they've won
2 tournament games in his tenure.
They've won a game. They've never
years.
gotten out of that first weekend. This is the team to do it. And they were in the Pac-12 title game 2 years ago.
Yes,
when
they lost COVID year. Oregon State.
They lost to who? They lose to
Oregon State. It was like it was like they caught fire, and that was the only way they were going to make the tournament was by winning the conference tournament.
Yes. So I mean, I could see them making that kind of a run again. I mean, I'm excited to watch Cody Williams. All I've seen is like the scrimmage stuff and stuff like that. So, and they played Metro State in an exhibition. But yeah, it's exciting times because, it's football and basketball now, and all basketball all starts Monday. So, Tyler, enjoy your double dip on Saturday and starting it out on Friday. You'll be a pretty busy guy this weekend. Make sure you read all of Tyler's stuff at denvergazette.com. Right now, some of that college basketball stuff's already up online if you want to check it out. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple and Spotify. And Tyler, we will catch up next week again.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.